Ronald Reagan was born on February 6, 1911 in Tampico, Illinois. While no member in his family attended college, Ronald ended up enrolling at Eureka College studying economics. Reagan went on to become a radio sports broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs. He was one of the most well-known announcers in all of sports, and everyone loved to hear him broadcast. In 1937, Reagan's acting career began when he contracted with Warner Bros., where he acted in over 65 brilliant films. When film roles began to dwindle in the late 1950s, Ronald turned to television, where he hosted and acted in many programs, most notably the General Electric Theater. When his acting career came to an end, Ronald was elected as the governor of California, where he served for 2 terms, once in 1965 and again in 1971, until he left office in 1975. At this point, Reagan directed his motive for running for president. He ran twice unsuccessfully for the Republican nomination in 1968 and 1976. 4 years later, he would win the nomination and be selected as the 40th President of the United States, where he served from 1981 to 1989.
When Reagan entered office, he vowed to revitalize the American economy, reduce taxes on American citizens, and balance the federal budget. Reagan also set out to make American citizens believe in themselves again, as the trust in the government has been the lowest it has been since the Great Depression. He was able to gain the trust of many American citizens after he was shot on March 30th, 1981, and survived. People viewed him as a superhero-like person running their country. With approval so high, he was able to cut taxes on American citizens. In late 1981, the economy hit rock bottom and entered into a recession. At the same time, the U.S. was increasing their national defense budget to fight off the Soviet Union and communism. With the lack of revenue from the economic downfall and the increase in spending, Reagan took on large budget deficits. Reagan ignored the deficits and continued to put more money into the economy in order to get it out of the recession. In late 1983, the spending paid off as the economy rose out of the recession it was in. Due to the large increase in spending, Reagan was not able to balance the federal spending. Even though he was not able to balance the federal spending, he was still able to complete his major goal: get the American citizens to trust their government once again.
In 1981, our critics charged that letting you keep more of your earnings would trigger an inflationary explosion, send interest rates soaring, and destroy our economy. Well, we cut your tax rates anyway, by nearly 25%. And what that helped trigger was falling inflation, falling interest rates, and the strongest economic expansion in 30 years. Over the course of this century, our tax system has been modified dozens of times and in hundreds of ways. Yet most of those changes didn't improve the system. They made it more like Washington itself, complicated, unfair, cluttered with gobbledygook and loopholes designed for those with the power and influence to hire high-priced legal and tax advisors. But there's more to it than that. Some years ago, an historian, I believe, said that every time in the past when a government began taxing above a certain level of the people's earnings, trust in government began to erode. He said it would begin with efforts to avoid paying the full tax. This would become outright cheating and eventually a distrust and contempt of government itself until there would be a breakdown in law and order. Well, how many times have we heard people brag about clever schemes to avoid paying taxes, or watched luxuries casually written off to be paid for by somebody %? By lowering everyone's tax rates all the way up the income scale, each of us will have a greater incentive to climb higher, to excel, to help America grow. The power of these incentives would send one simple, straightforward message to an entire nation. America, go for it. To young Americans wondering tonight, where will I go? What will I do with my future? I have a suggestion. Why not set out with your friends on the path of adventure and try to start up your own business? Follow in the footsteps of those 2 college students who launched one of America's great computer firms from the garage behind their house. You too can help us unlock the doors to a golden future. You too can become leaders in this great new era of progress.
While Reagan was in office, the economy went through both a recession and a period of rapid growth. Reagan used a policy called trickle-down economics, also known as Reaganomics, while he was in office. The idea of trickle-down economics is that the economic benefits that are given to big businesses will eventually trickle down to smaller businesses and individuals. For example, with lower taxes and increased investment from big businesses, they can produce more, resulting in increased employment and higher pay for workers. Not only did he cut taxes and decrease government spending, he also greatly increased military spending. In 1981, the economy went through a recession, and Reagan's popularity was dropping. The recession was a result of Reagan's tax cuts and previous president's actions, but it didn't matter in the end because about 2 years later the economy was booming once again, along with Reagan's popularity. In 1981, Reagan convinced Congress to approve the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, which allowed him to reduce the federal income tax to 25%. And 5 years later, he passed the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which closed all loopholes that allowed businesses and individuals to avoid paying taxes. During his presidency, 16 million jobs were created and inflation was decreased. In 1986, Reagan declared the start of the war on drugs with the Drug Enforcement Bill. The bill created a higher punishment for drug-based crimes, and it also budgeted $1.7 billion for the war on drugs. The war on drugs has been a very controversial topic and has sparked a lot of debate still to this day whether it was the right decision or not. Finally, in 1986, he signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which made it illegal for employers to hire illegal immigrants.
Reagan thought of the Soviet Union as the evil empire. He agreed on having no intermediate nuclear-range missiles with the Soviet Union, so there would not be a nuclear war. Some major events and issues that happened during Reagan's presidency include that he sent 800 Marines to Lebanon, there was a suicide bomber attack on Marine barracks in Beirut, and he also ordered an invasion of Grenada, which consisted of 2,000 troops in 1983. There they overthrew the Cuban government, which was replaced by one friendlier to the United States.
Ronald Reagan left office in January 1989. He had a few lasting impacts. There was a massive national debt, a federal budget deficit, and a trade deficit, all caused by the increase in military spending. Reagan also brought Republicans to the Senate after winning the presidential election. Ronald Reagan also had a relationship with Gorbachev, which resulted in a peaceful resolution for the Cold War. Ronald Reagan is said to be similar to Franklin Delano Roosevelt because both presidents came to office at a time of economic crisis, and they both had plans in turning around the economic crisis. Reagan signed the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which simplified the U.S. tax code. It reduced the top marginal individual income tax rate. It also reduced the corporate income tax rate and the total number of income brackets. While in office, Reagan was accused of the Iran-Contra affair. This scandal was about Reagan selling weapons to Iran in hopes of getting 7 American hostages released from Iranian terrorists in Lebanon. Unfortunately, Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1994. He eventually died on June 5, 2004.